Take two. And we are live on Oz Property Investors. We bring the big names and we have the big fun. I'm going to pretend we didn't have that take previously, but come and join us again. How you going, guys? What's happening? You feeling okay?
Good, mate. Still the same.
Same as it was 10 minutes ago, man.
It's all good. So I'm excited for this session, and I'm especially excited now because we're just going to run through exactly what we. So it's going to be a fantastic session, team. So for those who don't know, we're going to crack straight on to introducing. Thanks for coming on, Morgan, the special guest co-host. So for those who didn't see him a couple of weeks ago, go and check him out on our YouTube. It was a fantastic interview. And so Morgan as well, who is he today? You're a Sydney-based mortgage broker and founder at Full Circle Finance, and you've got a degree in economics. And you managed to purchase 5 properties with initial 40K. So good on you as well. And for Palise, who is for those who should all know him now. So you've done 1,000, well 2,000 now. You said before you purchased that many, and you are known as an educator. You are absolutely everywhere. Like it's amazing how much, I don't know how many have so much time in your day. But you've also recently released the Commercial Property Institute. And it is a fantastic. Give me some love in the comments, people, if you know what we're talking about. But no, so that's a fantastic course, and as people said, so let's crack on. So as you normally, I want to hear the answer to that question again, Steve, because it was fantastic. I was enjoying it, and I was just like, crap, we're not actually. Let us know if we're live on Facebook and if you can see all of us. But so normally we ask people what the first what got them into commercial property investing. But I want to know, what is it that's, and we'll get into what we're going to talk about after this. But I don't know, what is it, how has your investing changed over time? So maybe you got a different answer this time, 5 minutes on.
Don't, it's the same. I'm just checking on Oz Prop if we're actually live again. I can't see it. Anyway, someone write a comment if we're live. But I'll answer the question in the meantime for the second time. So the question was, how's my investing changed over time?
Yep.
So for me, the change, and I mentioned before, like, sounds arrogant, but it is. I'm only worried about cash flow now, not net wealth. Whereas when you're at the start of your portfolio, you're always worried about your size of your portfolio. I just want to build my cash flow because I want to enjoy life now. So increasing my cash flow from 100 grand, 200 grand, 300 grand, 400 grand. That's more important than having a 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 mil portfolio, because even though I'm going to be in a worse position in 20, 30 years in regards to net wealth, my next 20, 30 years are going to be funner now. And the example I mentioned before was I'm actually selling a lot of my residential portfolio and transitioning it into commercial because I get 3 times the cash flow, which builds my passive income. But it's also reducing my net wealth because the resis that are on 80 and 90% loans are then going into a commercial on a 60, 70% LVR. The one that we'll talk about later, I bought a little shopping center. It's a 55% LVR. So really reducing the risk there. So my portfolio is actually getting smaller, but my cash flow is going up. And the reason I said I'm actually going to be in a worse position in 10 or 20 years is if I've got, say, a 10 mil portfolio instead of a 15 mil portfolio, and the portfolio doubles in 10 years, I've missed out on 5 mil capital gains. So I'm actually going to be worse off in regards to capital and equity, but better in cash flow now. Like I mentioned before, it's an arrogant position because I've already got a large portfolio. So I'm in a position to do that. Whereas Morgan, who's built it off a small amount of capital, he's done exactly what you need to do in that situation, is leverage your money as much as you can. So you've got the equity for options then. Then you can look at all your exit strategies based on what you're actually trying to achieve.
Yeah, it's an exciting position to be in, isn't it? Like how good is it to be in that position? It's and to sort of be the stage where cash flow is more important for you for investing.
Yeah, it's just everyone's got a different goal though. Like I see like lots of other buyers. How many buyers you say they want to be a billionaire? And for me, I just can't think of anything worse of being like, oh, I'm going to slave away for the next 60 years just so I can hit a number, which no one really cares about. So I think it's just got to look into yourself going, what I'm actually going to achieve. You do fall in the traps. Like I look at the more successful buyers and, oh, what am I doing wrong? Why? How can I not like hit their goals? But then you just got to stop looking at their goals because they're not you. There's least successful people more happy, and there's more successful people more happy. So the money is not the solution, without sounding too airy-fairy.
Yeah,
No, I
nice.
like that because it actually has like a meaningful impact to you as well. Like that's what it actually gives you. It gives you what you really want as well. It's not just the numbers, it's what it does to your lifestyle as well.
Yeah. One of the actual causes I think why I've grown so fast in my business, I actually thought by traveling around Europe and posting all my photos and things like that was going to get people go, I don't want to work with Steve. He's always on holidays. It was actually the opposite. More people call me up being like, I want more of that. How do I get that? Whereas they don't resonate with some buyers agents, for instance, that are still working 12 hours a day in an office just to make a buck. So the people always gravitate towards you that are most similar, I'd say. How are we going on Ozprop? Is it live yet or not? I can't see it on the Facebook group.
No, mate. I'm just. I should have just done it. I hadn't needed to do a whole new event. It's okay. I'm going to post this. I'm going to post YouTube on there now, and people can actually comment on. Yeah, jump on there, and we'll get a huge crowd on YouTube, which is where it's easier anyway as well. So I'm excited for that. So what we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to talk about lending updates, and Palise's got his lease stock calculator, which is going to be never before seen exclusive that we've got coming on, and we've got what we all came here tonight to talk about what the what price point you should be buying commercial at in 2024. I'm going to go around the commercial sort of assets grounds, and then we're going to even sort of talk about the deals that Palise is invested in and why it's crashing deals as well. So much content, so much value, and I'm gonna post a link and jump in the comments because it's going to be heaps. Throw your questions, throw your comments. The crowd is absolutely going wild, and not simply because I stuffed up the link, but no, it's going to be an amazing session. Oh, look, we came here. Sadly, here we go. Now it's more fun here anyway. I can bring the comments up. I don't have to worry about typing them in. So here we go. We jumped on here for the beard gags. Okay, I don't know what's funny about my beard, guys, but no. So it's gonna be great. So Morgan, what I want to know from you, because you've been calling around the lenders today. So what is your what are your updates in the commercial space? What are you seeing out there? Are lenders still going to 80% quite comfortably, or can we go to 100% now? Or?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's 100% as best as I'm aware of. Like, it probably might be possible, but it'd probably cost an arm and a leg to go about that. And when it comes to buying commercial property, it kind of depends, I suppose, to a degree how you're buying. So if it's like property investor and it's purely for that purpose, then probably the most common form of doing that is what's called lease stock lending. So look, compared to a few years ago, it's probably not as easy compared to back then. And that's purely just because of where interest rates have gone. And obviously with how banks kind of view the like industry class, so if it's a retail, office or industrial, they all have their kind of preferences and risk ratings internally that will then kind of dictate how much they're going to lend you. So there's a number of, I guess, factors that all kind of come into, basically a box, you could say, and that with the credit department of that bank will then really more or less kind of give you their, I guess, their appetite for that particular deal. So like for lease stock in particular at the moment, just because of how interest rates have gone, it's just not as easy to get the stock standard, what would be 65% LVR with most of the major banks. There are actually still banks that still do that, or some that even do 70% or even 80%, depending on how you buy. But there's no like quick and easy answer. It's always it depends with the banks. And that's when, I suppose, as a commercial broker, that's when you speak to your panel of banks and then really just kind of workshop it with them to get the best outcome for your client.
There you go. Can I hold your feet to the fire a little bit, Morgan, and ask, well, what is from your perspective, what you're seeing out there? Who's the most competitive at the moment in commercial lending? Like, what are you sort of is it a bank lender or is it a non-bank lender? Who should we be factoring in when we're looking at these?
Yeah, again, it depends like where you are and where like what your kind of stage of the property journey is. But if we stick to kind of banks that we all know, a very recent deal that I came across was one where it was a office in Sydney CBD. So typically, like offices aren't as favourable as some other asset classes. For that particular one, that was through, I guess you could call it maybe a second tier bank. So Bank of Queensland, for example, the LVR on that one was actually 70% as a lease doc loan. So they're definitely out there, the good deals with banks. It's just, dependent on the asset, the type of the client, a number of other factors. And yeah, I guess that's when having a relationship with banks and being able to workshop with multiple banks to get the best outcome can kind of help.
Nice. That's what I like to hear. And what are you kind of seeing from your sphere from your team as well, Palise? What are you seeing from a commercial lending? Like any really interesting things that are happening and coming?
Yeah, I try to avoid like what's immediate coming, what's past coming. You deal with what's at the time. That's the thing. So like I just bought a little shopping center, which we'll go into details later. I got 6.5% on a lease doc loan. The best I've kind of seen was 6.42%. I think it was Suncorp. My 6.5 was Vincent George. And then full doc can be anywhere kind of from 6.2 to 7 as well. But that might be a good segue when Morgan was mentioning about the lease doc loans and why they're a bit harder to actually get nowadays. So like the whole premise of a lease doc is the rent covers the mortgage. So back 3-4 years ago when we're talking like 4% interest rates, 5% interest rates, and you're getting 6, 7, 8% net yields, that property with the ICR of like 1.5, for instance, so the investment interest coverage ratio, washed its own face. Now that we're getting like 5.5%, 6% yields and interest rates are 6.5%, it doesn't actually look after itself. So you actually need a bigger deposit. So I'll just share my screen. Actually, that's probably the easiest way. And let's have a look at my little calculator.
Your exclusive lease stock calculator.
Yeah, man. I've given the banks private. I'll let you share my screen.
Sorry, I shared it too early. Let us know when you're good. Don't want to share anything too private.
Hold on. It's already open. There we go. All right, cool. Let's have a look, Ski.
Here we go. So this is a lease doc. So I didn't even know that there was such, because I saw in the comments in the lead up to this, people were saying that the lease doc calculator can actually be quite complicated. So
it is.
Yeah, go on.
It is. So actually, I've got the 3 major banks down here, a second tier bank and 2 non-bank lenders. So I've got behind the scenes, it's all their policies of how they actually assess it. So I've obviously left the bank names out because I don't want anyone coming after me. But it'll give you a general gauge of what's possible, which is quite good. So the premise of the spreadsheet is you can either look at how much deposit you need for a commercial purchase, for a lease doc loan, that is, or what most people do is what's the max purchase price. So if you know how much funds you've got and you want to find out, okay, what I got, basically the orange is what you put the inputs. So you put in the estimated net yield. So that can be 6%, 5.7%. If you're buying like a high risk one, like a petrol station or something, it might be 8, 9%. So you put that in. This is the hard one for people to answer because it changes constantly. So you'll just typically look at the market and say what loan interest rates are at the moment. And then hopefully you can get that. If you talk to the lenders, you'll get a bit of a gauge. So like I said, I got 6.5, but let's leave it at maybe like 6.8. Let's be conservative. Then how much deposit you've got. So how about we make it nice, easy numbers. Let's go $1 million. Not because I think everyone's got that, but I think it's easier to times it by 2, divide it by 2, just get it. So this is what I was talking about, the interest coverage ratio, 1.5. It does change a little bit with some lenders, but 1.5 is reasonably conservative. Then you're putting your other costs. So you're going to have things like stamp duty, which is typically 3.3 to 3.5%. Buyer's agent can be 0 if you're not using anyone. Conveyancing costs, valuation, building and pests, just the typical purchase costs. Then it'll give you a typical figure for your max purchase price. So you can see here, when you compare this with Resi, you're putting $1 million in and you're buying a $2 million property, getting a $1.1 million loan. So we're talking like 55.8% is typically the max LVR with that ICR of 1.5. And then this is where the magic happens. So in the background, it's got all the bank policies. You can actually see for each of these banks what LVR that actually offer you. So most of them, you can see that the top one here with a second tier bank, you're 63%. So that's the best you can do in this scenario, which isn't outrageous. Like 6% still a decent yield. 6.8% is a fairly standard interest rate. Whereas 3 years ago, when this say might have been 4%, all of a sudden, bang, we've got LVRs of 70% we can buy a commercial on. So this is a cool little tool, just if you like want to assess a deal and you're trying to make your decision based on, say, like 6.5%, let's say you find a 7.5%, without even talking to a broker, okay, am I in the ballpark of something I can afford? And that's why I've also done it the other way of working out, okay, how much deposit do I need? So you can do it inversely. If you find a property for, say, I don't know, $2 million and you want to see, okay, what's possible with a lease stock loan, it'll tell you how much cash you need to get into that deal. So like I said, no one's actually developed one of these because there's so much pain in the ass stuff going on in the background for it. But again, still talk to your mortgage broker. And that's why we've got talk to a mortgage broker. But it's a nice little assessment if you're looking at deals, if lease stock is your only options for lending, all right?
I tell you what, I'm impressed. Like, that is an impressive calculator. I'm impressed I can actually put links in YouTube now. Mate, it's all coming to play. This is why I don't need Facebook anymore. We love Oz property, but no, that's really that feels very impressive, Palise, because I could imagine if you would have, how much time and effort did you and the team spend behind, or did you sort of pay somebody to properly? Because I imagine you'd have to sort of put conditional formulas in that that sort of
ex mechatronic engineer, man. Like, spreadsheets are not a problem for me. The hardest thing is getting the information, which obviously I have to go to brokers because I don't know bank policy.
Yeah, that's right.
But so we'll chuck it in the Facebook group. So I'll send you the Excel spreadsheet. You can chuck it in there for download.
There you go. We do need to download. I will create a resources section. So hold me to that, people. Even if you listen to the podcast, send me a direct message if I haven't done it. If you're listening to this in the future and it's not up on the Oz property thing. But I want to know, before we move on to what a lot of us, well, I think we're doing really well for time. Like, even though it took us 10 minutes to get to the second stream, so we're doing really well. So I want to know, Morgan, what is the most challenging part of getting loans approved in commercial lending at the moment? What are you finding out there?
Clients.
Yeah, that is kind of one of the answers. Nah, it's, for most people, it kind of depends where they're at in their journey, I suppose, and how much wealth they've got behind, and whether they're wanting to do like what Steve's got, where you've maybe had a resi portfolio that's gone through multiple cycles, where you can then sell to then transfer into commercial. For people starting out, if they've got like one or two investment properties, it could be a matter of waiting one or two property cycles or selling the whole portfolio down to then get into commercial. But the biggest obstacle is just having some sort of, liquid assets to start in commercial. That's the hardest part, I'd say. But then, yeah, as we've kind of touched on already, like as Steve said too, like rates aren't as what they used to be. A number of years ago, like the ICR test was even lower. So just policy as well as rates, it's just kind of making it a little bit harder. But that's where I suppose being a little bit more creative with who you go to and who you speak to when it comes to going to banks. So
and when you say ICR, we're talking about interest capitalization ratio. Is that the acronym?
Interest coverage ratio. It's same thing. Yeah. So basically, total like interest plus the rent divided by interest. So yeah.
Are you finding, Morgan, a bit more of a push to self-managed super funds? Because I see it from the back end where clients are coming and buying commercial properties for self-managed super funds. But you find that lending, because obviously people are restricted with servicing for typical lending and now exploring other opportunities, hence moving from resi to commercial, lease stock, low LVRs, self-managed super. But I am finding, especially the last 6 months, I'd like to see probably the data from the banks, but I'm finding a big push for self-managed super funds.
Yeah, no, definitely. Oh yeah, you go, Jeff.
I bought this up from Frank Guitar. I think that's it. He's got a guitar I love that. If everybody has any questions or comments, so starting with an S200K at SSF, not wanting to buy anything above 680K, because this will dovetail quite nicely into what Steve asked about SMSF. Does somebody have a chance on that? Because the LVR on that would be roughly, I'm just trying to, you get about 65-ish% LVR.
Yeah, even with a 60, or even with a 70% LVR, so we'll do 200,000 divided by 0.35. He's talking 570K. But I think his question is not wanting to buy something above 680K. So I think he might also be asking, can he buy a quality property under that? And the answer, quick answer is yes, as long as you're not expecting 5-10 year leases. McDonald's as a tenant, little warehouses and retail shops are definitely possible.
Yeah. I was talking to one of your managers today, and he's saying that somebody wanted $1 million asset with national tenants, and they wanted a 6, what was it? I think they wanted a 6% yield, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting. They're looking for a unicorn potentially, but
we get a lot of people that want under market value, higher than effective yield, value add potential, national tenant on a long lease. Which my normal response is, you don't have to buy a unicorn. If you buy a very, very good property now, it's better than waiting for a unicorn in a year or two.
There you go. Yeah, and stay tuned to the end, team, because I've pestered Palise to tell me where he's actually buying, not just in commercial, but resi. And Jonah might not like that, but that's okay. We're all good. So onto the topic of the show, where the best price to buy commercial in 2024. Before we get into that, I want to set the scene, because we'll have people from all sorts. We'll have people who haven't bought commercial and may just be sort of dipping their toe in saying this is the first time they've encountered commercial property, and all the way to people who may sort of have multi-million multi-million-dollar commercial property portfolio, including probably Steve Palise. So I want to sort of move up the sort of difficulty challenge sort of thing. So for those sort of new players to the game, what types of commercial properties are there, Steve?
In general, or just like what are we buying?
Take us through, like industrial, we've got retail, you got office. Like, run us through that. Give us a quick overview, because I think that'll be useful for people before we start talking about So
industrial, retail, office are the typical main ones. There are specials, so things like petrol stations, cinemas, car wash stations, which banks typically you need even bigger deposit for those, a lower LVR, because they categorize them as special assets. But quick overview. Industrial still really, really tight. The vacancies have come up a little bit, but they came down from like 7% to like 0.5% in capital cities. We're up around 0.7, 0.8%. So they've kind of came off a little steam. It's not really going anywhere. The demand's still there. That was just because of the COVID craziness. So still some really good buying there. Still some good rental increases with inflation. So if you got leases with CPI, you're talking 5 to 8% rental increases on average. So some good market there. And as I've mentioned on other Oz props, it's probably the lowest risk one to get your head around, because you've got direct comparables. You can look at square meter rates for renting, square meter rates for sale, what sold in this complex, what ones went vacant, how long they were vacant for, and you're making a decision a bit more around the numbers. So that's probably the easiest one and the lowest risk at the moment. However, it doesn't actually mean I'm saying don't buy the other ones. So the next one is retail. This one's hard to answer because it depends what you're buying. Small retail strip is different to a CBD main street, which is different to one in like a shopping center, which is different to like a freestanding medical. They're all case by case. It's going to be to do with foot traffic, road traffic, demand for that type of tenancy, things like that. You can buy really low risk retail, and I'm going to show you later. I bought a whole shopping center, so I've definitely went all eggs in that basket for retail. But it's based on basically like what area you're servicing. So I really like suburban retail, because you're always going to need GPs, chiropractors, hairdressers. Yeah, anything, tattoo parlors, like that, the stuff where you need to go in person, we're always going to need. The risk with the retail is it typically has longer vacancy periods than an industrial, because an industrial is 3 concrete tilt-up panels and a roller door. If the tenant leaves, a new one moves in a month or two later. But industrial tenants in the lower price point, so I'm talking the sub 2 mil, which we'll talk about price points a little bit later, they're generally more volatile. The better tenant you buy, the quicker they leave. So I'll say that again. The better tenant you buy, the quicker they leave. So they might be on a 3-5 year lease, but successful businesses in industrial grow and they outgrow the space and they move on to the next one. So unless you're buying like a big warehouse where you know they've got room for moving and they stay there for a long time, but vacancies are tight. It's sort of the opposite for retail. You keep the tenant for as long as they're a successful business. So the more profitable they are, the longer they stay. So a really successful hairdresser doesn't open a bigger salon. They typically open another salon in a different area. So you've basically got the tenants for the life of the business.
And is the reason behind that, Steve, my understanding and sort of having learned this along the way, because when you have things like even a dentist or a takeaway shop, maybe not so much, but a doctor's or your hairdressers, you would probably imagine have high initial sort of fit out costs. That then if they sort of start moving, chopping and changing every sort of 2 to 5 years, you then sort of outlet. And I think another one is a physio or a chiropractor. They sort of can have, I mean, maybe they don't, but a hairdresser, I imagine, would, because you got the sinks and it's a very specialized sort of space. So is that why your hairdresser, you just keep them in there as long as they're performing well, and why they stay?
Yeah, so that is a big reason. So they can't just up and go like industrial. Industrial, you've got some pallet racks and they can come in forklifts and move within a day. That they've put investment into it. But it's not the only reason. They're trying to run a successful business. So why, if you're in a good location that's a successful hairdresser, why would you move and gamble it? So they'll typically open another hairdresser and another, because that's how suburban retail works. You don't just move to a bigger suburban retail center thinking you're to get more people. So it doesn't necessarily work like that. But the fit out cost obviously is an immediate way they're not going to leave. Like you got a cafe or a pizza shop or something, like you're talking 200 grand to fit that thing out. So they're locked in for that. But if they do leave, because you have to wait for another small business to come in like that, you're talking longer vacancies. So you're typically talking like 3 months to 12 months on average. But then the average tenancy period is probably like 7 to 15 years. Whereas on a small warehouse, probably going to get a new tenant every 3 to 7 years.
Yeah, and with office space, what I'm sort of hearing on the grapevine is that we've worked from home. Like they are getting people to sort of come back into the office. So you sort of have the 3 to 5 or sort of 2 to 3 to 4 days. But I'm still hearing in the sort of the not so great offices, they are struggling with vacancy. Whereas the more sort of higher end, that potentially they are sort of doing okay. So the vacancy rates on those. So I think there's a bit of a disjointed sort of market in that office. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I'm actually keeping a careful eye on office space, because like if the numbers are right, it's can be worth buying. But fundamentally, like I do in my residential, I want a land component. So I would not go out and buy a 22nd floor office, same as I wouldn't buy a 22nd floor apartment. So I want the land component. So if there's a little freestanding office or something like that that can be repurposed, and I start looking down the barrel of going, okay, I can get 6% in industrial, or I can get 8.5% in office, that industrial needs to grow at 2.5% per annum just to remain on par with the office space while you've got the tenants. And then there's a lot going on with repurposing and things like that. So if you're looking for a bargain, office space is somewhere to look, but you probably need to do some form of value add with it and be aware of obviously the risk with vacancy. But even prior to COVID, I wasn't a huge fan of office space because I don't like paying millions of dollars for sky space.
Yeah, and actually on that as well, Steve, like what would be like probably the main difference, I suppose, on doing like kind of more of a ground floor type office space as opposed to one that's higher up? Like what are the main differences in risk from your perspective on that?
Good question. So the ground floor ones are ones I'd look at, even though you don't theoretically own the land, is because it also doubles as a retail. So you get the versatility of having a retail tenant. So you can have office on top, but it can still be a hairdresser or a medical. So all of a sudden you're casting a wider net for future tenants. Whereas if you buy the 3rd, 4th floor, like you can get medical specialist suites, but they could be on any floor. But you can get a business that has walk-through traffic that comes in. Cameron's asked a good question as well about commercial leasing agents saying tattoo tenancies can be tough with insurance. Spot on. They don't like certain types of assets. My property I bought actually has a laundromat in it. They also don't like that. So I have to pay a premium to have a laundromat because they see it as a fire risk, especially because it's an untenanted laundromat as well. So yeah, good spot.
This is an interesting one, and it's sort of one we were talking about, I think, before the show about the economy and potentially with. I think the economy is still going relatively okay. I mean, it's not. Yes, the cost things are not sort of unemployment's ticking up a little bit. So, and yes, cost of living, wages, stuff is still hard to find. But so, I mean, some businesses are going under. Like look at Melbourne CBD. I think that's probably not going too great. Is commercial really the ideal environment to go to for first timers? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I get asked this every single time, and I've been doing this for 10 years now, and I've never heard the economy doing well. So it's always a thing of like, oh, economy is doing terrible. But unemployment's still quite low. Like we're still sub 4%. We're still strong there. But my reaction to that question is always, if you think that, why would residential be a good buy? Like if the economy is going bad and jobs are basically, having more unemployment, why would the residential sector be really strong? Because the people need to earn money to be able to service the loans. So it's the same argument, but I'll premise it with, depends what type of commercial you're buying. So yes, obviously if office buildings are going under and like, I don't know, finance and accounting and all that type of stuff is going down, office is going to get hit hard, which is kind of what you see during kind of downturns. And so it just depends on what type you're buying. You're not going to buy a high risk business, but like they're called two-paced economies. So like in recessions, some industries do really well. If you own a fruit shop or a bread shop, you kill it during recessions. If you have a privileged type one, if you own a Rolex store, that's obviously going to struggle during downturns. So it just depends what you buy. But I'm typically buying kind of this suburban, what I call essential services. So that way, hopefully I'm not an economist like Morgan. It's going to be okay in the long term. But have that long-term mindset and have your buffers in place. But I wouldn't put a commercial buyer as a first time if they don't have residential, unless there's a purpose to it. And then if there is, I make sure I protect myself. So if I've got like a retiree client, I buy multi-tenancy or I buy something with a really good guarantee and a long lease so we can actually weather those storms.
So you've actually answered one of my questions about, well, what are the risky or what are the safer, and Phantom come in there as well. Got some interesting names tonight, don't we? What would be the safest asset for investors dipping into commercial? And I think that'll dovetail quite nicely. But I want to save that one because Frank Guitar, I think it's Guitar, Gatia. Sorry, Frank. He wanted to say because I think this is a fundamental one for commercial investors. And I was thinking about this myself today because I was like, I believe I sort of know the bit of drive. It's the largely sort of yield driven, isn't it? But what's your answer? I know you've answered this a couple of times, but for those who make it first time seeing you, Steve, what drives the value in commercial property?
Exactly the same as residential, supply and demand. So how many people want the property for rental or for buying? That's going to push it up. But going to Frank's question, so he's saying if it's the only industrial property in the area, what comparable properties would you base the rent increases on? Really good question, and it's really tough answer. You need to do a bit of a thumb suck based on what the resi market's doing, what type of business. What's an example? Even ignoring industrial. So we bought a bike shop, so like a bicycle, like touring bike kind of shop that was in a residential. So it was in Wynnum in Brisbane. Yep. So it's a residential house that was a bike shop on a main road surrounded by residential, and there was no other retail properties nearby. So that's a case where you're like, I actually have no idea what fair market rent is. And you can do as best you can. You can go to adjoining suburbs and try to find cafes and try to find other bike shops and things like that. But generally there'll be a thumb suck. So you'll know for retail, it'll be between 180 and 220. And if you want to be conservative, you stay on the low side. But then it also depends on who the tenant is. So for Frank's question, if it's a medical tenant on a 10-year lease, I'm probably happy to have them pay a little bit less rent than a high risk bike shop, for instance. So he's spot on. That's the hard thing with commercial. If you don't have comparables, it's really hard to work out fair market rent, which is why I said before, go industrial in like a body corporate complex or an industrial zone. So you've actually got direct comparables. So you're actually backing your decision up with some numbers.
How do you feel about because I've heard some, I wouldn't say horror stories, but I've heard some challenges with body corporate and strata. Like how do you sort of feel about that yourself if you don't actually run the strata? Like if you're is there a risk or is there challenges, like, or is it just overplayed?
No, there's risk, but that's also why you have due diligence clauses. So you do a body corporate report and you assess the hell out of it and you make sure there's no special levies coming up, there's no big maintenance issues. Still get your building and pest inspection. Typically, commercial is a bit simpler as well. So, like, I'll show you my shopping center because that's got a few issues we've got to work out. But if you're buying like an industrial, it's 3 concrete tilt-up panels and a roller door. Like, there's not much. The biggest issue I see, obviously, like roof issues. So it's renting or unapproved structures in the complex that they're aware of. And then that flows on insurance. But like I said, I've got an Excel spreadsheet for every property that we've crashed this year so far. And there's quite a list, which is a good sign that like we're actually walking away from deals. Whereas resi, I bet you probably don't crash as many as this one.
Yeah.
Do we want to go into that now, or do you want to still talk about like different
No,
price points?
I want to know, because I don't feel we've actually covered the prices where you're sort of seeing value in commercial property, which the whole, like, not getting away so fast there, Steve. I want to see price. I want to see your mechanical brain working away. I want to make you work tonight. So let's run through, I don't know, your top, your favorite three commercial assets you like. So I imagine it's going to be industrial, probably retail. I don't know what the third one's going to be. Maybe there's not that many. Industrial, retail, throw a third one in there. What are you sort of seeing that where those price points work for each of those different types of commercial assets?
So I get asked this all the time. So there's like educators out there and buyers agents that say don't buy below $2 million. But I always say to people, like, people always have an agenda. Either they've got like too many clients, or they're trying to push people into residential or whatever it may be. I don't care. Everyone knows. Like, I got two books. I got a resi and a commercial book. Like, I like both of them. You buy to what you can afford. What changes is just the type of property. The yields don't change that much. So people will say, oh, if you spend 3-4 mil, you get out of the mum and dad investors, the yields just don't skyrocket up. If anything, sometimes they drop off because you start moving into like blue chip tenants. So like we're looking at a pet barn at the moment on a 5% net yield. You start looking at McDonald's and I don't know, Bunnings, you start looking at 4.5%, 5% cap rates. Whereas if you go to like a stock standard, I don't want to say no name, but a smaller, like, I don't know, single city industrial tenant, you might get a 6.5. So the yield doesn't change. All that changes as you move up in price point is the variety of properties that you can look at. So if you start looking like sub 1 million, you're not going to get a freestanding warehouse in a capital city unless you're really far on the outskirts or it's a tin shed or something. To get that, you have to go regional, which will typically have longer vacancy periods. In some circumstances, sometimes not. But then as you start shifting up from say 1 to 2 million, you start getting out of the body corporate type properties and maybe getting into freestanding. The leases will start getting longer as well. A little small industrial, like body corporate one, is going to have a small mum and dad tenant, average Joe's electrical services. They're going to only sign a 1, 2, or 3 year lease. And they're going to be more volatile as tenant. They're not going to have as good guarantees on the lease. So that one, you're going to go through more tenants more often, but have short vacancy periods because there's lots of small businesses ready to jump on. So you start moving from 1 to 2 million, you start getting more of the multinational names, and they sign the 3, 4, 5, 7 year leases, and they rent with room to grow because they've all got growth protection. So they rent something maybe 30% smaller than the floor space they need, and you get them for longer. But if they leave, the vacancy period isn't a month or two. It's typically 3 to 6 months. So you start shifting into kind of better quality tenants, longer leases. Then when you get up above 2 mil, which is the other people are talking about, then it opens up. You start looking at freestanding, more value add opportunities, blue chip tenants, long leases, really, really cool sites that you can do stuff with. So it just changes the variety. The yields change slightly based on who the tenant is, things like that. But there's no secret formula of if you spend $8 million, you'll all of a sudden get a 9% net yield when the $2 million ones are selling at 6% cap rate. So yeah, most of it's just furfies. You buy what you can afford and you mitigate the risk based on what you can afford. Same thing with residential. If you can afford a $250,000 house in a regional town, you assess the risk of, is that going to grow? What's the maintenance bills? Because it's an older property, and you have your buffers in place for that.
Yeah. What oh, you go, Morgan. I want to see.
Yeah, I was going to say,
jump on.
look, I don't know if this is going off on too much of a tangent because I know we had talked a lot about like industrial, retail, and office. But I mean, like for you, Steve, like, do you see, like within your business, are you helping many people with like the special purpose type commercial properties where it's like childcare centers, anything outside of that? And why would it make sense to pick those instead of the other three?
We still do, but they're normally like special clients as well that have experience in that. So we're more of the sourcing. So they're like one that we got at the moment, we signed up last week, is an expert in caravan parks. So we're sourcing a caravan park for them because they know how to refurb and run it and turn it around. So we can go buy a $4 million one and they can turn it into an $8 million one just from running the management. But that's also very time intensive. I rarely try to convince people to buy that stuff unless they know what they're doing. So yeah, we do have a handful of them, but they've got experience in that, probably more experience than me. So like they'll know that industry more. I've just got better agent connections, and that's why they're coming to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense because, like, even from a lending perspective, they're quite tough to finance. Like the valuations, it's banks with the criteria. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's typically because the value of the property is also based on the success of the business. So
Yeah.
like you buy a caravan park, they know if it's mismanaged, the value is not there. It just runs itself into the ground. Same thing with other special ones as well, like car washes and petrol stations and things like that. So, but yeah, like main point to take away is obviously banks don't like them. So don't think you're going to get an 80% LVR for them.
Yeah.
No chance.
That's crazy that apparently arrogant can now be seen in a good way. Palise, look at you changing people's minds and influencing.
Who wrote that?
Phantom. I loving these names on YouTube. How good is it? But so I wanted to ask because is there much difference you're sort of seeing at the moment between capital city versus regional? I imagine the big difference is cap rates or yield. I mean, yields and cap rates are different to some extent. But what are you seeing between those two different sort of segments?
Generally, if you're going regional, you'll get a better cap rate. So typically, we're buying on average in capital cities between 5 and 6.5% on average. So if you buy a property like Sydney, you're closer to 5. If you buy Brisbane or Perth, we're closer to 6.5. Then you go regional, you start talking 6 to 7.5%. I don't touch anything with less than 50,000 people. So it's got to be a major capital city.
Yeah.
Industrial in most of them, again, it's case by case because like some areas are really tightly held and there's an undersupply and vacancy rates are really tight. But general rule of thumb for an industrial anyway, the vacancy periods are longer than a well-encapsulated area in the city. Because in a well-encapsulated area of the city, if you've got residential surrounding it and they're changing zoning from low density to medium density and they're building up, they're not building any more warehouse space. So the demand for car mechanics, wholesalers, distributors, fabricators, storage, that's going to grow as well. So you get that demand. Whereas a typical regional area has land that they can keep building to fix the supply. But in saying that though, you can still get more capital growth in a regional town. Same as residential. And there's plenty of buyers agents that have proven data of regional towns outperform capital cities every day of the week if you pick it well. So you can still have that. Retail's a bit of a weird one as well. So typically a main street of a regional town for retail is lower risk than a stock standard suburban retail in a capital city. And the main reason for that is they've only got one main street. A lot of the times it's heritage listed as well. So they actually can't develop it. So if you can get something on the main street, then it actually does really well because all the road traffic, all the foot traffic goes through and they can have some really tight vacancy rates. Whereas if you go buy something obviously on the outskirts of regional, then the vacancy rate shoots up as well. And this is the best and the worst thing for commercial is there's no one size fits all. You have to look at every single deal. And this is what I find with a lot of armchair investors. You can casually browse realestate.com on an evening and go, that looks like a nice house. I'm going to check some numbers. Yeah, it seems all right. You can't do that with commercial. Like once you've seen a picture and an address on real commercial, that's the start of you having to do probably 4 or 5 hours work just to be able to say, I like this property or I don't like this property. Whereas most people still try to transpose that looks like a nice building. Doesn't have anything to do with
it.
Yeah.
What are the what are the key, before we start talking about reasons you've crashed deals, because this will sort of maybe reveal some of that. But I want to know what are the key sort of top, I don't know, it's hard to sort of say top 3. What are the top 3 sort of due diligence checks that people absolutely have to be doing or should be doing?
Yeah. First one, check square meter rates for sales. So if you buy an industrial, check the square meter. Sounds easy. You're nodding like, oh, that's easy. Of course. You need core logic for that. So it's not like residential. You go on like, I don't know, a website and go medium house price, recently sold. You need to go through that. Then you need to look at the deals and look at what size they were, divide that up, then dig deeper and go, okay, did they have a mezzanine floor? What was the fit out or who the tenant was? So you got to do that. Then you need to do the same thing for rental, which is even harder because there's less information on that. I'd say only 2 out of 3 on core logic actually have the leasing campaign. So they'll say this is what they're advertising for rent. That doesn't mean they actually got that rent. So you do that as a gauge. Then you actually need to know property managers on the ground to find out what they're actually renting for. And this is probably one of the best benefits of using a buyer's agent is because we're buying in the same areas quite a lot. We know all that data straight away. So it's a bit quicker for us. So that's probably the two biggest: square meter rates for sales, square meter rates for rental. Then the other one's probably, I'd say, assessing versatility of the property. So that's the big one for me, because I always have that 10, 20-year mindset of I'm going to lose this tenant at some point. So weirdly, I'm one of those buyers agents that I want to get a good tenant for my clients and for myself, but that's not that important in the grand scheme of things. It gives you that short-term gain, but I want to make sure in 20 years' time it's still a good asset, because that's what's going to give me the capital growth, keep it tenanted, and basically mean it's a good quality property.
Yeah. And for those who want to go beyond the sort of what the high level of, you've got this, and you have to put your email in, but that's okay. I mean, you've probably got your email if you bought a book.
Do you want me to pop it up? I can show the PDF so they can actually see what they get.
Okay, show it to it so we don't have to. Yeah, I mean, you should put your email in. Check this out anyway. I'm not just. I have seen this, and it's in your book as well.
Get on my annoying mailing list.
It's not that bad, actually. I like you. So you're going to show us this checklist, and then we'll talk about the reasons why you crash deals as well, because I think that's important for people to understand what you what people are picking up.
Yeah. So you got site, you got occupation, health and safety, you got the service contracts, you got the value add opportunities, comparable sales, rentals, foot traffic, road traffic, occupancy studies, vacancy studies. Got to look at town planning and zoning, all that type of stuff. Then you actually have to assess the tenant, unlike residential. So you got to get rental ledgers. Got to obviously stalk the business. You got to interview the business and actually find out if they're successful, if they're staying on, all that type of stuff. Check that they're being paying everything on time, all that type of stuff. Review the lease, look at the rental reviews. Big one, this is what people a lot of times miss out on, is look at what security they've got on the lease. So whether it's got a personal guarantee, bank guarantee, what's the bond, where are those stored, things like that. Because if it's got like a personal guarantee and the owner of the business doesn't actually own anything, it means nothing. So you got to cross-check that type of stuff. Look at fit out, make good clauses. Insurance is a big one at the moment. Outgoings, repairs and maintenance, tax, special conditions, building and pest reports, and then that is it. So there's generally, like, our due diligence reports are pretty much about 80 to 120 pages long. So they're quite involved. Like, it's not a little 3-4 hour task. We're talking 20 to 40 hours each due diligence report.
Yeah, and I think that the thing I love about sort of commercial, there is a good amount of resources. People want to do it themselves, and yeah, definitely go out there and sort of check that out. And you can ultimately do it, but it's just then, or how much sort of time, and it's like anything. If you want to put the effort and energy into it, you can likely. Here we go. I want to sort of. This is a question for Morgan. Maybe is it easy to get funding for mixed use retail below resi above? That's an interesting one. I like that, Jacinta. Thanks for asking it.
Yeah, so it's a little bit difficult in a sense, because it's hard to go and get a home loan for something like that when there's a commercial element involved.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, like, look, you can more often than not, banks will want to use some sort of commercial element, and to a degree, I guess it depends how much of the rental income could be resi versus commercial. So some banks, in that sense, could be a little bit commercial and let you use a like a home loan, but more often than not, it'll probably be commercial. Is it the same with what you've seen, Steve?
Yeah, it typically depends on what the title is. So if you've actually lucky enough that it's two separate titles, you can potentially get the two loans against it. But when it's not, which a lot of the times they don't have it because they want to save on like titles and body corporates and stuff like that, it will be commercial. You might be lucky in getting a portioned amount for residential, but you're not going to get a loan where they're like, oh, here's 20% of the loan at a 5.5 resi rate, and here's one. So to answer a question, you're not going to gain. I'm not saying it's easier or harder, but you're not going to get a better rate because it's got residential. That's the answer.
Yeah.
There you go. And Greg's saying you might be buying something off market. There you go. Maybe I'm sure Palise has got a message or two about that one. So I'd love to. So let's unpack and we'll get into some exciting. So stay tuned, because we're going to be doing. Palise is going to be giving some information on where he's buying and what he's bought as well. I think that's interesting. But give us the sort of high level overview of the type of reasons why you've crashed deals. So far, Steve, what are you sort of seeing?
I can do even better, and I'm going to share my screen and actually show you things are crashed.
So if you're listening to the podcast, jump on a YouTube or jump on Facebook. I'll get this video up on Facebook. I'll even load it up as a premiere on Facebook. How good is that going to be? So people will get to watch. Steve has been nothing but awesome. There you go. So I'll have to show actually Swingers Club. Oh, geez, there you go. I don't know. Don't ask me why.
I left that one to last for intention. So, I've just basically got the capital city of what we're kind of buying. There's a few random ones like Central Coast and Sunshine Coast and Brisbane, Newcastle, stuff like that. But a lot of the time, finance becomes actually a problem. Not necessarily because they came in short. So we actually only had, I think it's only 2 or 3 that have come in short. That's actually hard for us to come in short because we're actually got a qualified valuer in our team. So when we're doing due diligence, we're doing the valuation ourselves anyway. But a lot of the time where the finance will actually come in short is where they're not accepting something that we're actually accepting. So some examples are they might have an unapproved mezzanine, so they don't take into account that rent for that. Or retail, you might get, like, say you're buying a cafe and they're paying rent for like the front street where all the tables sit out on the front. So they might have like 50 square meters there that they're paying rent for because they've got exclusive use, but the tenant doesn't own it and the council could take it away at any time. The valuer will say, well, no, I don't, including that rent as part of it. So if it's 20% of the rent, then the valuer comes in 20% short. So in those circumstances, you might try to get a 20% reduction, or you might cop it on the chin and pay the difference. So you can see that there's actually a few where finance have caused some dramas. The other hard thing, and Morgan can attest to this, is it's not like residential where you get a pre-approval because the banks don't know what you're buying. They don't know if you're buying a 7% yielding office space or a 4% yielding warehouse. So you kind of like, you get approval in principle, but it's going to come down to the deal that you actually find. But most of our ones are due diligence.
Yeah.
I can talk through some of the due diligence ones. That's probably the one. Actually, it's a good one as well. Just buy got cold feet. That sometimes happens. We find things under due diligence and they kind of don't want to accept, and we're not salesy. We don't push people into deals, and we move on to the next one and find a clean and tidier one. But some of the big ones, I've left the more interesting ones down the bottom. So similar to residential, you get build and pest issues and things like that. One of the ones that was interesting, we found combustible cladding. So insurance doesn't like it. The valuation definitely didn't like it. So that is one, even though it was a great yield, it's not worth the gamble. Like, it's not worth buying it and having a $200,000 fix of the building. So that was an industrial property in Brisbane. So there's that one there. Rent was half of the one that should be. So that's probably a typical one. The rent that was presented isn't the rent that they actually were paying, because the agent's going to tell you anything. This is why you get rental ledgers and you cross-check, okay, what have they actually paid and for how long? So you do all that. But this was
like someone paying month to month, Steve?
No, so it's just the rent wasn't actually what was stipulated on the information memorandum and the lease. Because commercial's Wild West, like, I've actually been guilty of this with my personal properties, is like, I gave a rental reduction during COVID. I didn't go back and reassociate the lease with the lower rent. It was just a bit of a handshake agreement of, cool, for the next few months, I give you a 20% reduction. So in that case, if someone was buying my property, they would have been like, why doesn't the rent match up with the lease? And that's why you need the rental ledger. So a lot of times that happens with small tenants that are struggling. The developer owns the property and it's a lease back. That's probably a good one that we crush quite a lot as well. So I wrote that one down. We bought a property and the owner of the property was also the tenant, and they didn't disclose any of it. And we only found out because we ran a credit history check on the owner and the tenant. So we paid for that as part of due diligence. And then we actually realized the director was the same person and they didn't disclose. So we just walked away because, like, even though they were paying fair market rent, the property was all right. If they're not disclosing that, imagine if something goes wrong. We just don't want to get into a legal battle with someone who's kind of unscrupulous like that. So you get stuff like that. As I mentioned before, roof issues are probably the main one for industrial properties. But as we go down here, this was a really interesting one. So we bought a little complex. It was in Brisbane, four tenants, industrial complex. One of the tenants lived on site and was the caretaker. So I imagine the history of it was probably like one owner of the whole premise, and he's put his mate in there to look after the site and said, I just live in it. So even though we weren't buying that one, we had someone using one of the other warehouses, and it wasn't zoned for residential, illegally staying in there, looking after the property, charging for any maintenance that he did. So that was just one where you get that gut feeling of like, this could be a benefit, having someone on site constantly looking after problems.
Be a
But
legal issue.
legal issue, insurance issue. And the thing is, the banks wouldn't have probably even known. So like we did find in the lease a little clause about caretaker, but I don't think the valuer would have known about this because it was in a different property to the one we were buying. But we were just like, no, this is going to turn bad at some point, or he's going to overcharge and there'll be discrepancies. There's a lot of properties to get. So we actually walked away from that one. So that's a bit of a weird one.
I wanted to know, so with things like your building and pest issues or combustible cladding, which combustible cladding can be a huge issue, or is probably a huge issue. I want to say, as they sort of say, with these things, every problem has a solution. It's just a cost attached to that solution. Do you sort of go back and say, well, hey, look, we've identified this. Do you attempt to negotiate, or do you just sort of leave it up to the client to sort of say, well, yeah, how do you run with that?
Well, almost on every deal, we find some form of issue, and we'll either renegotiate, cop it on the chin, or crush the deal. So you're seeing the ones we crush the deal. The combustible cladding one, even if they were say there was going to be a special levy of $50,000 for each tenant, and I could get $80,000 off the purchase price, I'd still probably convince my client to walk away because it's not worth the hassle, issues with insurance, the tenants leaving. I know some tenants not paying or being able to afford, some owners not being able to afford the special levy. It's just not worth the risk. You're better off just looking for another property, lick your wounds and go, okay, I've paid for a building pass, I've paid for evaluation, time to move on and go from there. So there's lots of properties. So I don't know why you'd choose to buy a high risk one or one in a flood zone and things like that. And I actually had a chat with a client today who found a property in a flood zone. He wants to buy it because it was a 7.2% net yield, and the one I sent him was a 6.2. I said, it's fine, you get an extra 1%, but that 1% is because every 30 years that property might flood, and you'll be up for a few $100,000 to fix the property. That will also
insurance probably as well.
Yeah, insurance premiums they're a little bit high, but it's not just that. It's you've got to have a slush fund for literally if that does happen, then that's going to cap capital growth for the next 5 years. So typically in like a Brisbane, if there's a flood, that property doesn't go through the roof the year or two after. Like it's just, why would you choose to actively buy there unless there was an absolute big premium? So like I've bought a few flood zone properties for clients, but we made sure we got a really top yield for it and assess the risk. And the ones we bought, the property on the title was flooded, but it didn't actually hit the building during the 2011 flood. But we got like an 8.5% net yield. So we assessed that risk and took that risk based on who the client is. But this one was an interesting one. So this was in Perth. We've actually bought, and we didn't know about this when we bought one in the complex. So it was an industrial plumbing, cracker of a deal, just a really tightly held complex, low vacancy rates, decent rent. So we bought one there. Then about 3 months later, this one came up and we looked at it and we were like, cool, we've bought in this complex before. We know the body corporate stacks up, vacancy stacks up, got the price we wanted. Awesome. And then the tenant was a bit of a weird name. And they just said, oh, it's a club. I think they said or some form of association association or club. And we're like, oh, cool. So we went ahead with it under contract. We didn't send our due diligence guy to have a look. And then he walks upstairs and sees, oh, there's 5 bedrooms up here. Oh, there's a spa bath in here. Like, what's going on? And we worked out this is where the gray area was. So us and the client actually wanted to proceed on this one because it was actually a swingers club, not a brothel. So banks don't like brothels. They consider them high risk. And we told our client this. We're like, look, we've never bought one of these. It's not a brothel and it's not zoned as a brothel. We think we might be all right. Let's roll the dice on it because he actually didn't personally mind that it was a swingers club. But then, when the valuation did it, they denied. We went back and forth quite a few times. And then the valuation came in short because they said it's a swingers club and we don't like that type of thing. But on paper, like there's nothing. It's not illegal. They're using the site as is. One of the ones that came up though when we spoke to an insurance broker was they said the same thing as the banks and the valuer was it's a very gray area for insurance. So like you're paying a big premium if it was a brothel, but because it's a swingers club, probably not. If it was just a car enthusiast club and they went there and they tinkered with their cars or whatever, motorcycles, whatever, it would have been fine. But because it was a swingers club, people aren't paying for sex; they're paying to visit the club. But again, it was just one of those kind of funny ones that we ended up crashing, even though it was actually a good property. The location was good, but not worth insurance risks, not worth the short valuation. So we moved on to another property.
The podcast just got not safe for work listed on it. So if your boss is listening to this podcast, I mean, I hope they're very liberal in their assertion. But what I thought this is interesting. So fans, on that list of crash contracts, and this is, remember people, so if you're listening to this, jump on YouTube or jump on the Facebook when it's up there. Why no Victoria or South Australia in that list? And I think this is only, I mean, if you looked at your list of purchases, like let's sort of unpack some of them. Like, do you sort of have a breakdown as the states and territories that you purchased your commercials?
Hold on, so I'm just sharing my screen again. So there are some Adelaide.
Okay, Adelaide.
So I think we've got three or four Adelaide ones. We buy in Adelaide quite a lot. So is
that because the stamp duty, no stamp duty on commercial?
It's a benefit, but I never buy for a tax reason, Jeff. You know this. So
like a tax depreciation, you don't buy that. You don't want to let the tax tail wag the dog, whatever it is.
Yeah, but
you know what I mean?
Stamp duty concession where you're not paying stamp duty. It's lovely that you're saving 3.4%. If I've got the choice of paying market rate for a property that I get free stamp duty 3.4%, or a bargain in Brisbane or Sydney that I get 5% below market value, I'm buying the 5% below market value. So I'm not buying because of the tax. It's a nicety to have, and it can stretch your budget a little bit. But we buy there. We started actually buying in Melbourne. So Melbourne was on there for the tenant and developer one I actually spoke about. That was a Melbourne retail. The main reason we don't buy a lot in South Australia and Melbourne is because yields are quite poor. The bang for buck wise, you start talking 5%. However, Melbourne, we've actually just hired an on-the-ground Melbourne buyers in because opportunities are picking up. We are starting to get 5.5%, 6.2% there, so things there. But again,
don't say too loud, Palise. Don't say too loud. I want more opportunity to buy resi in Melbourne. So I know you buy.
We're talking commercial, eh?
I know, but it's a sign of indication of what's happening. But that's great.
Victoria is also in more debt than the rest of Australia, so that's a consideration you need to look at as well.
Yeah, the economy, as we sort of, before we go to the reveal as to what you've sort of looked at, what you've bought as well, where you're sort of buying. How much factor do you look at the economy of the sort of state you're buying in? Do you go down to the suburb level? I mean, or do you focus on the specific type of property? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I always focus on the typical type of property. I know the big data for the states, but besides Northern Territory, I'm still comfortable that they're going to be around in the next 20 years. I don't think they're going to diminish into hay bales blowing down the street. So it's not my main decisive factor. It depends what sector you're buying though as well. But the vacancy and days on market and supply and demand for that type of property is probably more important in the interim than the economy one. I always tell people I'm not an economist. I have no idea about that stuff. It's not my realm. I'm good at commercial property and I'm good at property. I leave that to the experts. But yeah, the stat I always tell people, commercial property and residential has quadrupled in value in the last 30 years. So how much is the economy going to have to play with it?
Yeah, nice answer.
Yeah.
Before we get into where Steve is buying and what he's bought recently, this is something special. We don't play this one all the time now if Joe's watching, good luck to, he's a bit upset with this, but watch this ad. There is a special offer and it's still there. I did check it before, so it's still available. So watch this and we'll be right back, team.
Hi all, I've got a big problem. This is the Palise Property weekly sponsorship ad. Except today, I've got nothing to sell, and this is because of you. Due to all your kind words, comments, amazing feedback, and sincere compliments about my newly released commercial property investment course, the Commercial Property Institute, I realised today that due to the Facebook algorithm, many of you, in fact, the majority of you, still may not have heard about this yet. So I'm going to do 3 things that no other course provider would even dare to do. Let's start with number 1. I've taken out 5 lessons of the course and put them in the link that's being dropped into the chat right now. This way you can see the value in the course, and you can see the production, and you can see for yourself the depth of the insight that we dive into. Every other course provider hides everything behind a paywall, and you only find out if it's valuable or not when it's too late. Not me, you're going to see 5 sneak peek lessons from the course from which you can make an informed decision about whether this is for you or not. Now, number 2. To further prove to you that this course will transform you from being a total beginner into an elite commercial property investor, I'm going to show you a picture of me before I discovered commercial property investing. And now, after I've discovered commercial property investing. All right, you finally got your Steve without a beard shot, so it's time to get serious. Let's talk about number 3. And this will leave you without any doubts. Everything I know about commercial property is in this course. Every tool that we use at Palise Property is in the course, and it's delivered in a learn at your own pace online course at $4,997. But you're not going to pay that. In fact, you're not going to pay a cent if you're quick. I've decided to extend the free offer to OzProp Investors Group until the end of June. That's right, no cost, no credit card, lifetime access until the end of June. All you have to do is click the second link here in the chat and it'll take you to the page where people normally pay $4,997 for it. At this page, type in the discount code OZPROP and instantly get the Commercial Property Institute course for free. No catches, no gimmicks, just a limited time only offer. So click the link right now and get your instant access free. Thanks again for the amazing feedback, and I look forward to seeing thousands of commercial property moguls in the near future. Cheers, guys.
Especially for tonight.
You know what's absolutely
So
wild?
I
I'm like, I don't remember recording that. That's actually AI of me talking.
Is it? Oh,
Yeah.
geez.
Really?
You shouldn't tell people that, please, because people wouldn't know. But no, it's a great course, and to understand, yeah. So you've still got that offer there, and I don't know if you'll. I mean, if somebody's watching this in 8 months' time, you might be able to still target, but it is limited and great. So let's crack on, shall we? So I want to know. We'll leave where you're buying resi, because I want to know resi. That's a bit controversial because not a lot of buyers agents talk about that. We'll leave that to the end. But I want to know, what have you recently bought, or what are you about to buy, Palise? Could you give us the details? What and where are you buying? And
All right, let's have a look. So I settled on this on Friday. Let's probably go Windows, probably the easiest one.
did the big grow as you grew your commercial portfolio? That's a phantom.
I mean, it's 61.
Yes, he has to think about it. I think it grows every time he thinks. He's got a big brain, Palise. Yeah, big brain. Can I share your screen yet, or should we?
Yeah,
So if you're watching, yep, there we go. Here we go. So if you're watching again or listening to the podcast, jump on our YouTube at this about an hour in, because we'll talk through the property, but I think it's going to be very powerful to sort of see exactly what somebody who is a professional and a buyer's agent. So why did you buy this property first off, before we get into the details?
Yep. All right. So you can see my screen, I assume.
I can. We can.
So this is in Brisbane. So it's in Regent's Park. I'll just pull up Google Maps.
Logan.
Yep. So in Logan. So in South Brisbane. Just a little simple one. This is what I call a boring, low risk property. So like, there's actually nothing special about this. Like, there's no huge like uplift value add that I'm going to do. It is literally me transferring money to give me a steady passive income. So it's a little retail shop. It's got 8 tenants. They're all tenanted. Average WALE, I think it's like 2.8%, 2.8 years. So there's like a food works on a 7 years. There's a laundromat. There's a hairdresser, a beautician, a cake shop, a fish and chip shop, and a bakery. So it just kind of ticks the boxes there. The rents are undercooked a little bit. So they're probably around 20% below market. But I always take that with a grain of salt, because post-COVID world, the rents kind of take a little while to kind of catch up. But the main reason I like it, I normally like main roads because you want the road traffic. But the main benefit of this one is it's next to a high school a primary school with 1,000 students, and next to a major kindergarten. So it's 3,500 square meters. The houses across the road sell between 700 and 850. So as a site, kind of land site value, it's not bad. So I've paid 3.15 mil for this property. It sold for 3.5 mil about 5 years ago. So I feel like I've got it at a good price. But just from a land component, I could divide it up easily onto about 10 or 12 lots and sell the land or build houses down the track. I'm not doing it. Like I said at the start of the presentation, is I'm buying it for a steady passive income. So I don't have to work as hard and I can keep traveling the world. And it's just to diversify as well. So like my next purchase will be probably multi-tenancy industrial complex. So that way I'm basically divvying up over more tenants that way. We can go into probably some of the numbers in that, but what I'll actually show you.
I want to know what are your thoughts on? So it sold for 3.5 million ish 5 years ago.
Yeah.
What's the reason? Did somebody overpay that back then? Or
yeah, it was a trust fund that just paid an absolute premium because they were diversifying the assets. So I think it was like a joint venture syndicate that was kind of putting in, and then obviously COVID hit as well, so it kind of went from that way. But they've actually spruced it up. They've actually done quite a lot of maintenance works and things like that on it. But it is a corner block, so it's got good exposure. It's a big size lot next to a school. I went through the history of the tenancies, and every about 5 years, a tenant will leave, and it takes around 6 months to fill that tenancy. So for the negative on this one, I'm always going to have 6 or 7/8 of the rent coming through. But what I'll actually show you, so this is just where it is if anyone's looking. I didn't get an awesome. I actually think this property is worth about 3.1, and that's what the valuation came is. I paid 3.15 because percentage-wise of that over, I could go get one that's similar like property with maybe one vacancy or a weaker tenant and pay below market rate, but it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. $50,000 on 3.15 mil is nothing percentage-wise, so I'd rather have it fully low risk.
1.7% roughly.
There you go.
Is what it
Whereas
is.
if you go buy $1 million property and you pay 1.7%, no one blinks an eye. It just sounds like a lot because I'm spending a little bit more than say like a 500 grand residential property. But there's no other retail strips around it. I'm basically encapsulating this whole area here, which is quite good. Did some research on the state school, things like that. One of the ones we'll actually talk about, I mentioned before. So there's a tobacconist next to the food works in this complex. When I was interviewing the tenants, the food works doesn't like the tobacconist because they sell obviously tobacco, being a tobacconist, and vapes and things like that. Small retails like IGAs and food works, they make around 30% of their profit margins from the sale of tobacco, especially in these slightly lower socioeconomic areas. So he actually doesn't like that tenant being next door to him. Because it's killing his profit margin. So this is probably the hardest thing with owning a whole retail strip. Getting tenant mix is really right. So we'll either be looking at a repurpose or do some form of collaboration or potentially move a tenant on if that need be. But the 3 times we got it inspected, I'm actually flying to Brisbane tomorrow to do pre-settlement inspection before settlement on Friday. It was heaving. Lots of foot traffic, lots of road traffic, even outside the school hours. So we actually checked it at 9:30 a.m. and it was still busy. And 1:30 p.m. and it was still busy. Obviously, like school pickup and drop off, it gets even busier. But during the day, it was still busy. Lots of cars, lots of people. So I think the foot traffic of this will kind of keep it going quite long that way. So you can see here, there's different types of kind of tenants and a pretty decent mix besides the tobacconist, I'd say. What I'll actually say, so the issues I mentioned before that we actually came across. So on this back wall, there's a retaining wall. It's probably on the way out. So it's just kind of getting a bit old. There's probably around 5 years left in it. But as you guys know, retaining walls gets expensive. So I've actually budgeted around 150,000 for replacement of that. And then there's another outdoor area where that's getting a little bit old. So I'll probably renovate that just to spruce it up and just help the tenant that owns the cafe there to obviously have more people sit there, make it a bit more applicable. And then basically over time, if I clean it up, I can increase the rent back to market rate. So they'll give me the 20% uplift for it. But I didn't buy it for that. There's no huge value adds. Like I said, it's just a nice, clean, tidy property, somewhere to park my money that I'm always going to get inflation, spreading the risk across kind of 8 tenants. But one of the things I wanted to talk about today is the due diligence. So I've actually, can you see my screen? Can you see my drive?
I can.
Yeah. So you've got all these documents you got to go through to actually check things. So like this is just what the agent gave us. So he gave us 17 folders of like gardening contracts and maintenance contracts and their waste disposal contracts. And then obviously all the rental ledgers. And then they don't give you some of the rental ledgers and they don't give you some of the bond details. And you actually have to go through all that type of stuff to actually come up with some form of number. So let me just come back and I'll open a couple more spreadsheets. Let me just open them up.
There you go. Do you dream of spreadsheets? Do people give you spreadsheets for Christmas, please? Because I need them.
The good thing now is I've got a really good team that can do all that stuff for me, which is quite nice. So then I'm just going to show you this. So like, just to work out, can you see what screen here?
I need to make it a little bit bigger.
Are you seeing the outgoing ones, the one with the yellow?
Oh, it's a little small. Maybe.
Yeah.
No, I'm gonna zoom in. But basically, you can see here, it's not like residential where you just do a build and pest. We need to go through every single year and look at what the actual outgoings were for that property. So you got to cross-check everything. You got to get obviously the rental ledgers for it, and then go through. Literally, it's very tedious task of cross-checking numbers, what year, what it actually was, and assessing. Okay, what do they actually spend? Because the agent's going to tell you the outgoings, so you can actually see when the agents initially on the IM said, "Oh, look, last year only had 130 grand of outgoings, but we actually found a few years ago it was 165." So we had to investigate that. So we actually investigate. And we go, okay, look, repairs were really high. Why is repairs high? And then that's when you push back on the agent. You say, hey, 3 years ago we found there was almost 40 grand worth of repairs. What happened there? And they go, oh, they actually replaced some of the roof and like resurfaced it, blah, 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 which is actually a positive. I'm like, cool. They've actually done a big ticket maintenance item on that. But it's a bit eluding when you're working out a net yield and things like that, and they're presenting that it's 130 grand, knowing I basically amortized over that and looked at the average and said, okay, I think a more realistic figure each year is going to be this, because you will have maintenance. The other hard thing on this one is the net, the leases aren't net leases. So the actual tenant,
they're not net leases.
They're not, they're gross. So that's why this is really important for me. Part of me is owning the property now. I'm actually going to slowly transfer them over to net leases, but they're actually gross. So this actually affects my bottom line. So the difference between getting 100 grand passive income between 140 grand passive income is based on these numbers. So that's why it's really important in this case. It also gives me good control as well. But also I need to account for things like the roof getting replaced and repolishing the concrete out the front and the retaining wall and things like that. So I'll show you that one, but let me just pull back another spreadsheet now to give you a bit of an idea.
While Steve's doing this, what are people's thoughts on going through a deal like this? Do you have questions or comments? You're watching live and you're seeing somebody go through, sort of make their own purchase. What are people's thoughts? What are people's concerns? Like, let's get, this is going to be can be an interactive, as you guys want it to be, conversation.
The biggest thing the biggest thing I get from clients on this is they're always like, what are you doing, Steve? You get access to all these really exciting value add deals, things like. I'm busy enough with my travel. Like, I'm going back to Europe for 6 weeks in a couple of weeks. Like I don't have the time or attention span. I'm in a privileged position that I've got a really good passive income, a really good portfolio, profitable business. I don't, even my accountant was like, what are you doing, Steve? You're an idiot. I know in myself, I want a low risk, easy property portfolio to not stress. So that's why I bought it. So I actually didn't take their advice, and I bought something simple that I think is robust.
What deposit did you need for it, Steve? Did you need a 30 or what?
I can get up to 70% on this one because of the whale, but because I went lease stock, I'm giving personal information here. It was easier to get a lease stock than to provide all my business financials and my personal financials. So I just went lease stock because I had the deposit. So I've actually got a really low LVR on this one. I think it's about 55%. So the cash flow, it's about an extra 100 grand passive income to my portfolio, which is quite nice.
And Morgan, if you could talk us through or give us an insight on what whale. I mean, I sort of know what whale is, but I'm interested to know what's when you sort of look at whale, what does that actually stand for and mean?
Yeah, so it's I think it's weighted average lease expiry. So it's really just it's just the average, I guess, of all the total tenants under that property as a function of like a number. So when banks look at it or investors look at it, it's really to determine, I guess, a function of the rent and tenure of all the tenants in that property.
You're an absolute wealth of knowledge, mate. That's impressive. You explained it.
That was not pre-planned, everyone. I was put on the spot there.
You're going to grow a beard and start, yeah. But no, that's exciting, Steve. Like, good on you for sort of sharing some of that with the audience and sort of being comfortable enough doing so. And I think it shows that you can sort of do those. Like, I mean, you've spoken about TV sort of telephone towers, ATM sort of machines, all those sort of. You had the 810K mezzanine deal. I think it was 810K or 805 something. Yeah, so,
Yep.
which you can do in commercial, but if you get to this, is the reason you sort of decided to purchase one is your focus is mostly more on cash flow than capital growth. Going back to the start of the conversation.
Yeah, and low risk cash flow. So like I said, it's about it's like a 5.92%. When I beef the rent up, it's obviously going to become like a 6.3, 6.4%. It's just low risk. Like, yes, I see deals across my desk at 6.57, but they normally got some nuance about it. This is a nice thing. I won't buy another shopping center like this though. I will diversify, and like I mentioned before, get like an industrial complex or even a blue chip tenant. One of the ones I was looking at was in Newcastle. It was a pet barn with electrical wholesaler next to it, and the pet barn's on long lease, electrical wholesaler was there, and that actually had some value add. It was a development potential for residential up to 42 meters, but I couldn't get the price I wanted. I wanted 5.5% net yield. They were down like 5.2, 5.3. So I walked away from that one because I was like, okay, that's not as enough passive income as I actually want. So there's nothing special about this deal. And this is what I tell clients. I always get the clients we mentioned before, they want the unicorn. You don't have to buy a unicorn. I actually own a cafe, which I've spoken about before on other ones in Brisbane. That cafe has done incredibly well. Bought it for like 440 and it's now worth like 800 3-4 years later. And I've done nothing to it. So you don't necessarily have to buy every single property unicorn. If you want to be a billionaire or have $100 million, then yes, you have to do those risky, high stakes, high intensity effort ones. And you can do really well. You guys know Andrew Bean, one of my employees. He's really good at making money in self-storage, but he didn't just buy a property like me and basically go, cool, I'm done. He really worked at it for a year, had to change the site management, up the rents, do this, get the right collaboration between all the types of properties. It's really time intensive. You will not make money from flicking the light switch being like, that was easy.
Yeah, that's right. I agree. And as Morgan, as I saw a couple of weeks ago in your session, you bought fire, burnt out buildings and sort of did a lot of value add in your renovations. So I think that you can attest to that sort of value add. Interesting. Here we go. So shall we talk about locations, Palise? Like, where are you guys buying? Like, if you're comfortable sharing, like, what can you give us
for commercial?
Well, I want to know resi, but tell us commercial. I've asked people to tell us if your views on a location. So if people want to pop some location there, I can't guarantee Palise is going to know every pocket. I teased him before and saying he might be buying in Broken Hill and Humpty Doo. I'm sure you're not buying there. Maybe you are. I don't know. So if you have a location you want to get Palise's views on, let drop in the comments. We'll see how we go. But where are you buying for commercial? Perth. There you go. Perth's a big spot.
We buy everywhere. Bulk probably
everywhere.
70% of what we buy is probably a mix between Brisbane, Sydney, Canberra, and Perth. So they're our hotspots that we buy because you get really good bang for buck and we're getting some really good deals. But like I said, we're still getting 3 to 5 properties in like Melbourne, Adelaide, Hobart. The ones outside that, when we buy regionally, we buy X factor properties. So as long as there's something cool about it, i.e. freestanding, multi-tenancy, like that property I just showed you that I bought. If I found something like that in a major regional town, I'm still going to give it a look over because, like, assuming that the demographics right and it's surrounded by residential, that can make sense. I'd probably want a little bit more than 6%, probably want 6.5%, 7%. But my little secret to people is I think lifestyle, and this is probably going to half answer the residential as well. Lifestyle locations is where I'm personally really focusing attention as well. Because as technology keeps improving, people are going to want to be near some form of lifestyle. So the tree change or sea change, and that's where I'm looking. So I'm not just looking at random mining towns because that's not lifestyle towns. Towns with some form of vibe where people want to go there. I call it the holiday sigh. When you travel somewhere, you go, this is nice. That's where I focus my attention.
Oh, interesting. So what sort of well while we're talking, actually I'll ask this and then we'll get into resi because I want to sort of just don't have to give us everything, but can you still get 500 commercial these days? I think the answer is probably yes, but should you be buying at 500K? You've sort of spoken about 300 to 500 being possible. I think that was probably 1 to 2 years ago. You're still seeing value at that 500. probably yes.
Yeah, definitely not 300. We're definitely still getting around the 500. So you're getting little like 60 to 150 square meter warehouses. And as I sort of mentioned before, as long as you're not expecting a 5-year lease, you're going to get a little tenant, little car mechanic or wholesaler or fabricator or something like that. Still get there. Retail, we're still buying quite a lot of retail because suburban retail shops. So here's a prime example. The shopping center I just bought with 8 tenants for 3.15 mil, you divide that by 8, you've got 500 grand retails. So individually, I'd say that, well, hopefully, if I think they're all decent properties, you could still buy something like that. If I body corporate and strata title it, that's individual. They're sub 500K. So I'd still consider them a good property. I'm actually in chats with like some doctors networks that I know, and there's no doctor, GP, or dentist in the surrounding. I think it's like 4 kilometers away. So if I ever lose a tenant, they'll be the first people I approach of like, let's get a medical in. Will actually give me a better cap rate.
Yeah.
Steve, I got a question for like some of the properties you kind of mentioned, like buying and stuff. How many of those would be like private sale compared to auction? Just out of curiosity more than anything.
So we don't go to auction. We're typically I have in the past for certain clients, it's normally high net worth ones where we really want a property. The problem with auctions is the amount of work we have to do before going to auction is it's too much. Like I mentioned before, it's 30, 40 hours of due diligence. We would never get deals across the line. We normally do it high net worth. So if we're talking like a 3 to 5 million deal and we're like, this is a good site, and I'll be honest, we get paid a good commission for it. It's worth the risk. But trying to get paid like a 15, 20 grand commission and doing that 5 or 6 times and then not being able to service any other clients and missing out on deals, it's not really worth it. So most of ours are off market or on market properties.
Cool.
Yeah. This is an interesting. So somebody asked about Albury Wodonga. I imagine they're talking about commercial. It's a thriving regional. Well, I think it's thriving, but the biggest sort of spot. Then what do you think? What do you see? Do you do much or look at much in Albury Wodonga?
I don't think I've actually bought an Albury Wodonga, but a little secret. It's one of my areas I like for residential. So I like some of those regional towns, like like the Wagga Waggas, the Dubbos, everywhere's expensive. Jeff, where's not expensive?
Well, I mean, for the location, I mean, I'm thinking, I think it's sort of 600 or 700 in what I sort of looked at from memory.
You can get sub 500, but like I said, it's typically like a fibro type house. But I've made a lot of money off fibro houses as well, so you can definitely still there. You buy to what you can afford. So look at your price point, then go around Australia going, okay, what cities can I afford? Then start diving into the micro analysis.
Yeah, nice. So let's talk about resi, and we'll finish up with any sort of burning questions people have. So we'll probably have time for 1 or 2 questions, given it's already 9:30, or close to 9:30. So resi, where do you sort of see value? Where are you guys sort of buying? Like you said, tree change, sea change. Does that mean maybe sort of South Adelaide? Sort of were you buying a little bit in Adelaide, or which other parts of Australia?
Yeah, we did really well in Adelaide. So last few years we're buying a lot in that kind of south, kind of beachy area. So like Seaford, Aldinga Beach, Moana, areas like that. We're buying houses for 400 that are now 600. So, and that's just a couple of years. So they've done really well there. I still think there's a little bit of room to grow there. I don't think they're going to go to 1.5 mil, but I still think like it's only a half-hour drive to Adelaide CBD. And the biggest thing killing it there is culture. If you talk to an Adelaide person, they're like, I'm not driving half hour to work a few times a week. You say that to a Sydney person and they're just like baffled. They're like, I used to live in Parramatta and take about an hour and a half to get to Bondi Junction for work. By the time you call it the bus, the train, or so I think those lifestyles still have some room to grow. I think they're going to approach a mill like the rest of the kind of city. So people will search for state there. But that's sort of the secret is anything within a couple hours drive of a major city that has really good lifestyle and affordability. I think as technology improves, you're not going to have to go into the city any more than 2 or 3 days a week on average. So most people can cop an hour and a half drive a couple of times a week. And then just a lot of like the East Coast, like a lot of the areas surrounding like Coffs Harbour and Byron Bay and the Sunshine Coast and areas like that. Anywhere where it's kind of 30, 40% below medium house price, but still has the same lifestyle and within a hour drive, I think is going to have some good value moving forward.
What do you think about Wollongong, Palise?
Not that cheap. But again, as you know,
It's
with
not,
Liam, my general manager, and one of my head acquisition guys for Perth Commercial, they both live down there. We're doing development sites down there at the moment. Some good value for developments. The prices there, you probably have to go a bit further south if you want to start spending like sub 700K. But again, any of those lifestyle areas that within driving, they're going to perform the best moving forward. Like, I don't know if it's just my age, but like most people I talk to, no one's yearning to live in a West Sydney anymore. They all want that kind of cruisy life. But again, I know that sometimes means I'm out of touch with the people because young people obviously still going there. Vacancy rates are still tight.
Yeah. No, I was just asking to see what his thoughts were. I mean, I've definitely got a finger on the pulse down this way, and I think there's some value, but you just have to, if you're going to buy at that sort of 600 or 700, you have to have a bit more risk tolerance. They're in your lower socio-economic sort of status areas, and if you got to be willing to sort of roll your sleeves up. You're not going to get a set and forget property, or unlikely to get that. In my region at least.
Low socioeconomic, Jeff, doesn't mean low capital growth though. That's the thing.
Mate, you definitely know where I live. I mean, and it's definitely not the most highest socioeconomic, and it done fantastic, 50% over 2 years, which is the COVID boom, but no. So
one of my best performing properties is in Blacktown, and no offense to anyone who lives in Blacktown, but I bought in the low socioeconomic part of Blacktown, Western Sydney. I got that property for
Kings Langley, right?
200. No, it's in Blacktown. So I'm actually in the suburb of Blacktown on Reservoir Road. 230 grand in 2012. Like now that's like 750, 800. So you can still do well on that. But I can answer Jacinta's question. That's actually a really good question.
Yeah, because I know Jacinta, she does a bit of context. So she does a lot of Airbnb in regional towns. So that's probably a regional tourist town. So I imagine that's what she's interested about.
Yeah. So for tourist towns, fundamentally, they still have to have industry outside of just lifestyle. If, like I mentioned before, if you're within a couple hours of a capital city that has all the industries, then that's still adequate in my eyes because people are willing to drive a couple hours a few times a week. The just purely tourist towns need some form of like basically a way to commute or get to some kind of major town. So like I had a property in Foster, if you guys know where that is, like 3 hours north of Sydney, which is effectively a tourist town, but it's not that far away from anything. It's not like a 5-hour drive to the nearest area. So that can still have some good capital growth. But to answer to the question, a tourist town is fine as long as there's something that's going to keep it alive, some form of population growth or some form of industry, because people need to work. If you're going to be based somewhere, you have to have some form of income. Not everyone's going to be working remotely 100% of the time.
Yeah, true.
So,
I'm curious about Morgan. Morgan, where do you like for residential? Where's your little secret spot?
What are you seeing? Where's everybody buying?
Yeah, like it's kind of a combination of areas of like WA, Queensland, starting to see parts of Victoria pop up as well. So kind of like those three main ones, a little bit of Adelaide too, but like they're the kind of big four, I'd say.
Yeah. Do you love being a broker where you get to look at where the buyer's agents are buying? You're like, yep, cool. Thanks for the free information.
Look, it does help, and do see some cracker deals come across my desk. So you kind of get to see what goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And not all of them are crackers, by the way.
Oh.
Well, no, I mean, you can't. Yeah, that's I suppose, yes, you want to buy everything below comparable. I'm going to cover this term below comparable market. It's kind of the same thing, but I think it's in my head, it's a little bit different. I think if you're looking in an area that has the fundamentals and supply, hopefully then you can continue to sort of see that rather than sort of deciding that you need to buy sort of 20K below comparable value on every deal. But yeah, I think I do agree with you. Not every deal is going to be a cracking deal, unfortunately. This is an interesting one. Thoughts on commercial as a first, and I think we might finish this off on this one. Thoughts on commercial as a first or second property. Is it a case by case, Palise?
That's you know me too well, but I'll answer it anyway. So it depends on why you're buying commercial property. So it's going to come down to like what you're trying to achieve in what time frame. So if what was his name, Elijah, was 65 years old, buying a negatively geared residential property does not help for retirement. So we need cash flow. So we either need to go, I don't know, multi-tenancy residential, house and granny flat strategy, buy something a bit more regional or commercial. If you're 20 years old, use leverage. Do what Morgan did. Use 40K and buy multiple properties because your aim is to build a portfolio. So there's not timing. To give a general answer, most people, you want a handful of residentials first because you want to exhaust your borrowing capacity and your high LVRs, get your 80, 90% LVRs while you can. And then when you run into the glass ceiling lending, then go to commercial. That's the stereotypical kind of formula that most people follow.
Yeah. Is that what you're sort of thinking with your investing as well, Morgan, I imagine? Basically.
I mean, yeah, like that is true. Like, I mean, people just go until like the banks say no. And then if you can hold that portfolio through a cycle or two, goes up in value, gives you options like what Steve had. You can sell a few. Who knows if you're able to increase your income significantly, you can go another round of buying resi, or you can release equity from that portfolio and not have to sell the whole resi portfolio. So I think the key takeaway is, once you've acquired resi and you hold it for a while, then it gives you options. So then it's just picking what option suits you and your goals long term.
Spot on.
Yeah, it's been a great session, Steve. As we've talked to, we had a bit of a rocky road start, but that's okay. We got there in the end. We got YouTube cracking, and we'll get it up on Facebook as well. So what I wanted to say is just thank you for contributing. You've got your lease doc calculator. You revealed your own purchase. You revealed some of the places you're buying, and the best price to buy commercial. Best price to buy that in 2024. So for me, this has been an amazing session, covered heaps. And what's as Joe usually asks people, what's the best place to reach out to you?
Tag me on Ozprop or type in Steve Palise, but my website for my company is paliseproperty.com. But yeah, I'm a social media horse, so just type in Steve Palise anyway.
He's very, very busy. But what I wanted to give Morgan an opportunity. What's the best way? Because you've jumped on and volunteered close to 2 hours of your time tonight. What's the best place to check you out as well, Morgan?
Yeah, like same as Steve. You just Google my name, Morgan Bushell, or you can find me at fullcirclefinance.com.au. So one of those two ways, you'll find me on there.
Yeah,
one Morgan in the hand is worth two in the bushel, isn't that right?
Oh gosh.
How long were you thinking about?
I literally just thought about it then. I was like, I'm a genius. I'm a comical genius.
No, you took me back to school for that one.
Oh, geez. Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. So yeah, it's been an epic session. So watch this one back many times to sort of learn more about sort of the ins and outs of commercial. I think even sort of some of the crash, there'll be some gold nuggets in there. So on that note, team, as we all say, let's go and buy a commercial property at the right price in 2024. See you, team.
See you guys. Thanks, Jane.